and we'll distribute it out onto the coaches resource page, and then you'll receive the slide deck as usual for your reference there. So tonight we have myself, Ron Freeman, an SMT member who many of you know will most likely be on later. If not, Mike Cernowski will be covering the sport specific slides, the SMD VP of Sports. And also with us tonight, Steve Bennett, Special Olympics Maryland Senior Director, Community Sports and Competition. So we'll keep everybody on mute when we start out here. We will get into a discussion portion later into the slides. So as of now, if you have any questions, hold them until the end if you would. If anything comes to mind along the way, though, feel free to put that in chat. And we have a few people in here that can help answer those for you. So looking at the agenda tonight, we'll look over the basics of Zoom here, as we've talked about already. We'll go into the return to activity protocol. So we'll go into the requirements protocol there, and then jump into the sport-specific protocols, along with having some polls there to kind of see how we comprehended some topics that were covered, and then how we can apply that to our program specifically. Then we will jump into some sport reviews, mostly regarding rules. And then at the end of the slide, for your reference later on that we won't cover during the session, will be some resources that you can review if you need to. And at the end, again, we'll have an open discussion or question time.
Okay. Cool. And as Ryan indicated with the Zoom, if you need to raise your hand, you can do that. I think you need to have your participants window showing, and it will raise your hand. And when we get towards that portion later in the program, we can go through that, or we can then call on you for your questions. And then also the chat is there as well. But I think everybody from over the course of the last year pretty much knows everything there is to know about Zoom. So thank you for joining us. I see a lot of familiar names here that I think have heard some of this before over the course of the last year. But because we have some new folks, and also because there are a couple different changes and things, we do want to go through the return to activity protocol. The document that you see there, just updated yesterday, March 10th, is our return to activities protocol. This is available on the return to activities webpage. It's also available, or a link to that is on our coach resource page, and Ryan will include a link to that in the follow-up to this webinar that he sends out. Strongly request that you get that downloaded and read through it. It'll explain a lot of things. It'll answer almost any question that you have, but if you do ultimately have some questions still, please feel free to contact myself, Ryan. Jeff Abel, who is our VP of Local Program Development, is overseeing the overall return to activities, and he can help as well. So with the return to activity, couple key messages, and these will be repeated several times throughout. Coordinate, work with your area leadership. Your area director and his or her leadership team have been dealing with starting programs back up under COVID and under the protocols that we have, again, for almost a year. I guess actually maybe closer to 9 months since we weren't able to start anything until July 1. Also, as we're going through these protocols, these aren't recommendations, these aren't suggestions, these are absolutely requirements that must be followed if you're going to have your have a program started. They apply whether we're talking about track or we're talking about bocce or softball, so on down the line. And it may be the case in some situations that you may not be able to start your program. It may be that either you're not ready, your athletes aren't ready to do so, and that's okay. We certainly are hopeful, as things are starting to look a little bit better, that more and more programs will be able to offer some type of in-person programming, but it's okay if you can't. We do have our virtual training guides that are also available on the virtual site, as well as the coach resource pages, and those can be useful as well. So again, always look for that most recent protocol document. While we're going through this and talking about things related to protocol and to returning to activity, Medicals are still required for all of your athletes. Your volunteer applications, all those volunteer certifications, coach certifications, such, still apply during this period. And in fact, they also apply when you're doing training virtually as well. So be sure again to work with your area leader, area leadership rather, and they can make sure you know who needs what going forward. As we're going through this, every program, and we'll explain what the phases are, but every program starts in what's called phase 1 and will progress from there. Those programs that have progressed into phase 2 in the fall, and then we had to kind of take a step back because there was the surge that we had, can go more quickly, almost immediately into phase 2. But as of right now, everybody's in phase 1. And again, this is evolving. Things are changing. We just had in the last couple of days a change that we'll touch on here that we reviewed with the area leaders on Monday night. So hopefully that's one of the few changes that we have, other than when we eventually get back to close to normal. Okay. And while I'm doing this, Ryan, can you keep an eye on letting folks in, since I can't watch that? That would be great. Thank you. So in addition to the materials and information that we're sharing here, we have recorded, Jeff has recorded, 3 webinars for athletes. These are not repeats of each other. They build on each other, and the links are there. The links are also on the virtual SOMD.com, the return to play. This kind of walks through for the athletes the process and what they can expect in general for when they come back to training under the return to activities regimen. Highly recommend having them watch each of them. The first 2 are content. Again, they build on each other. The third one's sort of like a game show type of scenario to help test the knowledge and learn some additional content. In addition to these, Jeff's putting together a few additional live sessions for those athletes who'd like to participate in that way, and are and potentially ask questions with that. We don't have the schedule on those as yet, but those will certainly be shared, and we'll send stuff out, but it'll also be on that return to play website. As we go through these protocols, keep in mind they apply to everything anytime we have in-person activities, whether we're talking trainings or practices, whether we're talking competitions, meetings, etc. Again, in red and yellow, they're required. They're not recommended. And these protocols in general are being applied across the entire country. So it's not something unique to Maryland. We're going to share some information in terms of what Special Olympics allows at each phase of the protocol. However, what will be in place is whatever is the most restrictive protocols or situations, whether it's the Special Olympics Maryland set, the state of Maryland, your local jurisdiction, potentially even the facility that you're utilizing. They may have some requirements that are more restrictive. Whatever is the most restrictive is what you're going to follow. And again, your area leadership can help you with that, and keeping in touch with that. We're in regular communication with them on that topic. Also be aware that, as I think most of you may know, we have a fairly extensive interscholastic sports program in high schools around the state. And there's some other couple third-party programs that are doing Special Olympics under basically doing the whole thing themselves. They may have their own guidelines. The school programs, the ones that are being operated as an interscholastic program, are going to follow the school system protocol. So don't be surprised if you see something that's a little different going on somewhere, particularly, like I say, in a school system. That's because they're following the school system protocols, and it's okay. But you'll need to follow the Special Olympics protocols that we have here. And again, you're not required to do this. Talk with your area director. In fact, you absolutely must talk with your area director before you start back up. Here are the 3 phases, or 4 phases in a 3-phase process. Phase 0, hopefully we're never back to that. That's when everything was completely shut down. We're not there now. Phase 1 is when the incidence of COVID is still relatively high. In that situation, You can resume in-person programming with a couple stipulations. One, your groups or your program as a maximum of 10 participants. And when we're saying participants here, that includes everybody. That includes the athletes, that includes unified partners. If you have unified partners, it includes coaches, it includes volunteers, everybody who's in that immediate area. Now, you can have multiple groups of 10 as long as they stay 50 feet apart from each other, preferably with some type of a barrier or visual marker to keep them apart, and they don't intermingle. But you need to be the judge with your area director on making that happen so that it can be done safely. Also in phase one, also in phase two as well, there's a physical distancing that has to be enforced of 6 feet or 2 meters. Again, that certainly adds challenges when you're trying to train people. I think most of you know I'm a track coach myself. Trying to teach a new person to do the shot put when you can't get within 6 feet is not just difficult, it's dangerous in terms of them injuring themselves. So we need to use some judgment, and we'll talk about that later. In phase one, also no direct or indirect contact is permitted. Direct contact is when one person touches another person. Indirect contact is when a person touches an object and then another person touches that object without it being sanitized between. So if you're thinking relay races, that adds some challenges there in terms of what can and can't be done. And again, in that same vein, no shared equipment. And then we also have pre-screening when athletes check in, and we'll go over that in much more detail, needs to take place. When we get to phase two, where the incidence is somewhat smaller, I think it's 9 or fewer cases per 100,000 people in the county there, or the cluster of counties. Excuse me. Then we can go to where you can have groups of up to 50 people. And again, in that count includes all your athletes, your unified partners, your volunteers, your coaches, etc. Includes any family members as well who might be in that immediate area. Factor all of that in. We still have that physical distancing at that point in phase two. And while no direct contact is still in place, indirect contact can be can resume. So there can be touching without sanitizing between that. That said, we still want to sanitize the equipment between each session and so on down the line. And again, we've got the screening. Phase three is when essentially we're back to something close to normal, which may be quite a while still. I would anticipate at least a few more months with that, even in the best case scenario. So we'll be monitoring that, and we'll obviously keep folks appraised of that. As we're going through this also, you see that there's a double-headed arrow on the screen. As has been the case here over the last several months, we can move up into as far as phase two is, for example, and then situation got a little worse and we had to go back to phase one. It can go back and forth. That's decided also on a county by county basis and can be decided in terms of what the area leadership wants to allow based on a sport by sport basis. As an example, bowling as an indoor event has some additional restrictions that may not be able to be applied or handled in a situation or that you can't meet them, yet you maybe can have outdoor activities. So it's all, it could be any of a number of things. Everything's not necessarily going to be on an equal situation as we go forward, but work with your area leadership. The area director for your area knows what's going on and will access the correct information and get that to you. So touched on a number of things here. Ryan, you want to go ahead and launch the first poll?
Yeah, so on your screen right now, you should be seeing the first poll.
Yep.
So we'll give everybody about a minute or two to answer this. It is a multiple choice answer question, so you will be able to select more than one here.
Right. Okay. And you may have to scroll down a little bit to see all the text for there. And remember, after you've done this, to check off submit when you're done. Okay. take maybe another 30 seconds or so. Okay. Actually, Ryan, looks like we've got virtually everybody. So why don't we go ahead and share those results? Okay. And so going through, yep. Physically guiding an athlete's arm through a motion would not be permitted, nor would handing equipment to athletes or partners, again, in phase 1. Demonstrating from a distance, that's perfect. Using poly spots, not only to mark the ground, not only is that permitted, I highly recommend it, having a visual marker that they can do. When we've done some of these sessions, without a visual marker, people tend to gravitate closer and closer together, but having that marker there really can help with that. Throwing a football back and forth would not be permitted in phase 1 because that's indirect contact. The person's holding the football, throwing it, and the other person is catching it. And unless you have a very sophisticated sanitizing process, you're not going to get it cleaned in midair. If you do have one, please let us know. Kicking a ball towards an open soccer goal, perfectly fine. Of course, that athlete would need to retrieve the ball as well. And then once you put a goalie in there or a coach acting as a goalie, that would not be permitted in phase 1 because, again, we have the challenges of indirect contact. Okay, great. Looks good. Ryan, why don't we launch that second poll for here? Okay. And again, this is multiple choice again. And we're talking here, who counts towards that maximum allowed, whether it's 10 people in phase 1 or 50 people in phase 2. And again, you may have to scroll down a little bit to read the last couple. Okay. Another couple moments. Okay. And Ryan, why don't we go ahead and close that down? Okay. Thank you. And sharing, perfect. Okay. So yes, athletes, partners, assistant coaches, head coaches, and volunteers all in that area absolutely count. Families staying in the car, perfect. No, they do not count. And in fact, particularly if you're in phase 1, I would recommend that you ask people to do that. Let's see. If they come to the training space, they absolutely would count. And then if they're a good 50 meters away watching, perfect. They would not count. Great. You nailed that real well. Okay. So we're not going to go through this. This is basically that same phase grid that we just talked about. But since you're getting the slides, we thought we'd include this because this may be helpful for you in terms of capturing the information and reviewing it. So also provided here, and this appears as well in that return to play protocol that was on the title slide. I'm not going to read this to you, but it breaks things down really well in terms of what you need to comply with, what you should be educating your athletes as well as your volunteers and family members and such in advance. And then there's a couple on the next on the next slide as well. But read through there, you can see again in phase 1, actually for all the phases 1, 2, 3, recommends prior to attendance going over things such as the high risk conditions and such. In fact, you can, if you want to take and adapt these slides, you can do that and show that. Highly recommend setting up a Zoom session or something like that where you can go through this with your family members, with your coaches and athletes. Maybe set up 2, have one for your athletes and families and another one for your coaches so you can talk through how you're going to operate. Most areas have procured a Zoom account. If you don't have a Zoom account, there is a free version, and as long as you keep it to 40 minutes, it's there and you can utilize it. And then going through here, it talks through the preparing and gives you some pointers with that. Again, we're not going to go through this other than to note that in advance, preparing there, get what we're now, the communicable disease waiver, or CDW, is what's now required. That's the thing that just changed in the last couple days. And we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment. But getting that out to folks ahead of time, and then talks through some specifics on activities and such. Okay. And I'm going to watch a short video. As soon as there it goes. And Ryan, can you just confirm that you guys can hear when it plays?
In order to safely return to activity, Special Olympics recommends that participants wear a mask if on public transport, such as a bus, trolley, subway, or if carpooling with someone not living with them. If Special Olympics is providing transportation, face masks during travel and maintaining physical distance are required. Prior to entering any activity, practice, event, or gathering, all athletes, coaches, unified partners, volunteers, family members, and caregivers must participate in an on-site screening. It is important to take the necessary steps to create a safe on-site screening area. 1. Create a single point of entry. One entryway that allows participants to enter one at a time. Remember, we strongly advise outdoor spaces only in Phase 1. 2. Use chalk, tape, cones, or other markers to indicate what 6 feet or 2 meters looks like for physical distancing. 3. Make sure you have all the necessary supplies for a proper screening, which include temporal thermometer, pens, masks, gloves, disinfectant wipes or spray, hand sanitizer, COVID-19 participant code of conduct, and risk assessment forms. Volunteers will fill out a monitoring form for each participant that passes through screening. The form includes the participant's name, contact info, temperature, answers to screening questions, and the outcome of the screening. For instance, can they participate, or have they been isolated and sent home? Next, you will ask each participant the following required screening questions. We recommend using visual aids when asking the questions. 1. In the last 14 days, have you had contact with someone who has been sick with COVID-19? 2. Have you had a fever in the last week? Temperature of 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 37.8 degrees Celsius, or higher? 3. Do you have a cough and/or difficulty breathing? 4. Do you have any other signs or new symptoms of COVID-19? Fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, new loss of taste or smell, sore throat, congestion or runny nose, nausea or vomiting, or diarrhea?
In the past 14 days, have you had contact with someone who has been sick with COVID?
Yes.
Yes, you have? Okay, so I'm gonna actually have you step down here.
If a participant answers yes to any questions, they must be isolated from the group, sent home, and instructed to contact their healthcare provider. Participants who are found to have COVID-19 symptoms must wait 7 days after symptoms resolve to return to activity, or must provide written proof of physician clearance to Special Olympics to return to activities. Participants who test positive or have COVID-19 must provide written medical clearance before returning to sport and fitness activities. After answering the screening questions, you will conduct on-site measurement of participants' temperatures using a thermometer, preferably a non-touch thermal scanning one if possible. If a thermometer is not available, you must ask participants to self-monitor and provide results of that monitoring. If there are any concerns about fever, temperature of 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, 37.8 degrees Celsius, or higher, the participant should not be allowed to remain on site. If high, you may retest the participant after 5 minutes to ensure temperature is accurate. Record all names, results, and contact information using the template provided, and keep in case needed for contact tracing or reporting. For more information on Special Olympics return to activity protocol and safety guidelines, visit resources.specialolympics.org or consult your local program.
Okay. Oops. As an aside, the videos, there's 3 videos in here. Links to those are also available on the Return to Play site. So if you want to, excuse me, share them with folks as you're preparing, they're available to you. This is just a review of what was shared there. The 4 questions that you see there. 1 clarification. So we talk about contact with somebody with COVID. Yep. Fever in the last week, cough or difficulty breathing. That one, as well as the symptoms that are listed there, what we're talking about with them are symptoms that are new to the athlete. Many of our athletes have chronic medical conditions. I myself have some chronic medical conditions, and I would always say I've got congestion or a runny nose, and so on. And many of you probably would be in the same boat. What we're really looking for here is, do they have anything that's different? So, you know, and you would know your athletes and kind of tease that out with them. But with that caveat, they need to answer all 4 of those questions no in order to proceed. You then take the temperature check with 104, or it can't be at 104 or higher. The recheck is really important, particularly depending upon where your site is and you know what people are carrying with them and such. So I'll use as an example I coach in the Baltimore County track program. The walk from the parking lot up to the track is a good healthy hike. Folks can get overheated in that situation, and so you definitely want to give them, if they test high on the temperature, give them a chance to cool down, or if they're lugging something up there with them. In fact, it's actually, if you can, if the facility is laid out such that you can, advise having you do the temperature check and the screening closer to the parking lot, so that they can, if there is an issue, they can just head on right out rather than have to reconnect folks that you've got there. So with that said, Ryan, why don't you launch that 3rd poll and see what we got. This is going to be another multiple choice one, and you're checking up everything that's true. Okay, and why don't we go ahead and share that? Okay, so if a person answers at least 3 questions no, they can proceed. Nope, they have to answer. And I realize where that could be confusing if you're throwing in the caveat that with that, but yeah, they need to answer effectively all 4 of those questions as no, knowing that the symptoms one is for symptoms different from what they usually have. Great on the temperature, let them cool down. Everybody needs to be screened, not just the athletes and partners. Good on that. The no-touch thermometer is great. And then again, the parking area, nice job on that. Okay, we can close that down. And here, so we looked at the phased approach, and just some more on that. For an area that hasn't been in phase 2 yet, if they're still in phase 1, they need to be in phase 1 for a minimum of 2 weeks. Right now, everybody is still in phase 1. There are some, however, who could potentially go into phase 2, depending upon the decision of the area director, along with Jeff and his team in their situation. There have been several counties where the incidence has been low enough for a long enough period that can be considered. Again, need to look through in terms of having to show that the local program, so not just the area, but the local program, your track program, can meet the standards of pre-screening and such before moving up to the next phase. And again, your area folks, in most cases, may have, or in many cases, I should say, your area leadership may have arranged for a group of volunteers to handle the screening for you. We certainly hope that you as the coach are not the person who's doing the screening, but that you have some other folks that are there to handle that for you. Again, talk with your area leadership. Can't say that's going to be the case in every situation, but in many cases, that definitely is the case. We mentioned before, again, repetitive, whatever is the most restrictive is what we're going to go by. And then SOMD and the area leadership will be deciding on the phases that you're in. So,
Mike,
yes.
What if you can set up the screening like close to the parking lot, and that's really not close to where you're doing your training?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to count those people?
Well, they would definitely, because they're interacting with folks, they would screen themselves, quite frankly.
No, but
they wouldn't count. No, if they're separated by more than 50 feet, they wouldn't count
like
towards your 10.
10. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good question. So, so here, if there's a failed screening, what do we do? So as was described in the video, they need to be separated and then sent home and contact their healthcare provider to evaluate. And again, you can see there, wait 7 days after being symptom-free for 7 days, or get written proof from a physician. If they actually have tested positive for COVID-19, they do need to get medical clearance before they can return. So note from the doctor, whatever the case might be. So this is one thing that is different, although it's very similar. For those of you who have done a sport already during this situation, we had a thing called the acknowledgement of risk form. That has changed again in the last week, and it is absolutely required that everyone complete this communicable disease waiver. We'll see what it looks like in a moment. It is, even if they filled out that acknowledgement of risk before, they need to complete this new form. And we apologize for that. Again, as you can imagine, insurance is extremely important in order to have a program like ours. And it's just something that from a safety standpoint, and also just in terms of being prudent, the insurance agreement that has just been signed requires that this take place. So every person, even if they filled out that acknowledgement of risk, needs to fill that out. Then talk with your area on how they are going to submit it. There's a process in place. It's not going to be you, the coach typically, who is submitting the form to our network. There's a way that they upload it. Your area leadership already has that worked out, but it does mean that you're going to have to get those forms either hard copy or electronically to whoever is going to submit them for them. Those forms need to be in to our headquarters within 1 week of that participant's first activity. That said, as if you remember back on that grid that we had before of comply and educate and so on, strongly recommend getting these ahead of time. Again, your families or your athletes, your coaches and so on can fill them out and get them to you, and then you can get them all in before they even show up on that.
So Mike, do they need both forms? If they've already signed the first one, then we just get rid of that and everybody just does the new form?
Effectively, the first one is null and void, yes. So everyone, even if they filled out the first one 3 times, which a couple people did, mostly staff because they forgot to turn them in to different folks. But yeah, everybody needs this communicable disease waiver. Absolutely does. Okay. And actually, I missed this. So that last line there, there's not an anticipated expiration date. That is actually not totally accurate. We will be having folks, this is going to be part of, the intent is part of the medical packet as well as the volunteer packet, and it will be a release that everyone completes whenever they renew their medical or renew their volunteer application. So that's a little further down the line. Nobody's going to have to deal with that for a little while. But yeah, I missed when we were going through and editing this. Again, this is relatively new.
That's okay.
So, but just want to make sure you're aware of that. So how we are distributing this, we are keeping the first 2 pages of what had been that acknowledgement of risk, where it goes over folks who are at higher risk than others, as well as, very helpful, these list of expected behaviors that not just athletes, but partners and volunteers and coaches need to follow, so that they have those, and those expectations are still in place, even if the form itself has changed. And then this is the 1-pager that they would need to fill out. There is a statement in here, I think it's number 3, yep, that says they're agreeing to follow these behavioral expectations that they're of, staying at least, they're saying, yes, I will stay at least 6 feet away and wear a mask at all times when they're instructed, so on down the line. And we'll talk about mask wearing in just a minute. But anyway, so it still has that, which was part of that acknowledgement of risk before. But again, we would need that. The only thing that we need sent in through your area leadership is this 1 page that they've signed. We don't need all the other 2 pages. In fact, you want if they're doing it all hard copy, you want the athletes and family members and volunteers to have those so they know what they've agreed to. Okay. Excuse me. And these are all available right now on our virtual return to play, as well as the coach resource page, which hopefully all of you have used over the last couple of years. And then these, again, need to be submitted within 7 days of their first participation. This is just redundant with from previous, there's no change here. This just lists the various folks who are generally speaking considered to have a higher risk of a more significant challenge or a more negative outcome if they get COVID. And so they're agreeing to that. We are not telling anyone that if they're in one of these high risk categories that they can't participate. They may want to consider that, but we are not telling them they can't. It's their decision, or in the case of a minor or someone who has a guardian, it's in the parent or guardian's discretion on participating. Then, excuse me, as was mentioned, there's a practice log that needs to be filled out and submitted. This needs to be done each week. You can pre-fill out, if you will, the first 4 columns of the name, their role, contact information. That's necessary in case we do need to follow up. And then the acknowledgement is signed. I need to change that also. That should say the waiver's been signed. But each session, you need to have fill out whether they were screened or not, and whether they had the symptoms or not as a part of that.
Has this been cleared against HIPAA rules, HIPAA laws? We're not breaking anybody's.
This came to us from SOI, or Special Olympics North America. I am absolutely confident that they've gone through with all of lawyers and insurance and so on down the line to comply that. All we're checking off here is, did they pass the screening, and did they have the any signs or symptoms? We're not listing what they are there. So, but yes, that's been approved with that. So, excuse me. And then just as with the CDW needs to be in within a week of their first practice, this practice log needs to be submitted again each week within a week of that practice. So you have your practice, Bob's on here. I'm not sure when you have your track practice, but I know you do basketball on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights. There's going to be a different one, a separate form filled out here, and needs to be in by the next Tuesday to headquarters or the next Thursday. Okay. Okay. And then this next video will go over some of that as well. There we go.
Preparing the venue to safely welcome Special Olympics participants is vital for return to activity for phases 1 and 2. Arrive early to prepare the space. Start by ensuring the venue is disinfected or sanitized, especially the bathrooms and other high-touch areas. Wear disposable gloves for all tasks in the cleaning process, including the handling of trash. After sanitizing the space, set up signage that reinforces proper hygiene procedures, physical distancing, and wearing personal protective equipment, or PPE. Post signs in easy-to-understand language with visual cues in highly visible locations, like entrances and restrooms. The signs should describe how to stop the spread of germs by properly washing hands, following physical distancing guidelines, and explaining how to properly wear a cloth face covering. Also, make sure hand sanitizer and/or hand washing facilities or stations are available. Lastly, set up a single entry with screening and a single exit area, which means there should be one entrance into the venue and one exit out of the venue that allows participants to be at least 2 meters or 6 feet apart. For more information on Special Olympics return to activity protocol and safety guidelines, visit resources.specialolympics.org or consult your local program.
Okay. And so again, we've gone through a lot of the protocols. One thing to keep in mind, I mentioned earlier that you as a coach or your program may not be ready to start up. It's also the case that some people, whether we're talking athletes or coaches or other volunteers and such, may choose that they don't want to participate at this time under these requirements, and that's okay too. So if anybody does have a concern about what's required, that's fine for them to make that choice that they're not going to participate, but they do need to meet those requirements if they are going to participate. So again, have these items on site. It was touched on with the, I think the earlier video. And again, have the communicable disease waivers, even if you've captured them before or collected them before your session. Having a couple on hand in hard copy will make life a lot easier. I guarantee you at least once during your season, you're going to need them. We've already given each area 2 thermometers, gloves and such. Your area is replenishing that. Talk to your area director about procuring or getting their supply of these items that are here. Again, it's your area director who is key to making this successful. And hopefully all of you are already in communication with him or her or their designee. And I know some folks have a sport coordinator model that they utilize. I'm not going to read this to you about masks and face coverings, this slide and this next slide. I will summarize it. And it's also then covered a little bit in the next video. Everyone needs to be wearing a face mask, and we count gaiters are fine and such. Can't just pull their shirt up over their nose, but everyone needs to be wearing a face mask except under some very specific situations. For your athletes and unified partners, if you have unified partners, and Ron's in the waiting room, by the way. If you have, when the athletes and unified partners need to wear the mask while they're coming in up until the time that they begin actively participating in the physical activity. So up until they basically start their warm-ups or their stretches and so on down the line, whatever the process is that you have in place. At that point, they can take them off. I recommend having the athletes or not just anybody bringing maybe a Ziploc bag, and they can put them in there. Please do not go around and collect everybody's face masks. You do that, you have just cross-contaminated everybody's, and they don't have one to wear then when they leave. But if each person puts it in their own Ziploc bag, and then you could in theory collect those, or they could put it in their pocket, whatever, or if they have their own equipment bag that they've got with them. When they are done the physical activity, they then need to put them back on. So after your cool downs and such, they need to put them back on. If they're standing waiting for their turn to do the mini jab, no, they don't have to put it on and then take it back off. It's, you know, essentially when the program starts, and then when it ends, it goes back on. For coaches and your other volunteers, they need to be wearing their masks throughout the program unless they are also physically participating in the activity. So if you have a coach who is you know, working with your distance runners and is running with them around the track, socially distanced at 6 feet at least, then they can take the mask off. They don't need to be wearing that there. But if they're not, if they're you know, giving verbal instruction or doing demonstration and such, but not physically engaged, they need to keep the mask on throughout that time. Read it in more detail, but that's in summary what's in there. Okay. Let me see our good buddy Joe. Let's see.
As a coach, you have a critical role in ensuring the safety of your participants. It is necessary to adapt some of your coaching strategies to lead safe practices under Special Olympics' new return to activity guidelines. Before each activity, communicate the need for high-risk individuals to participate at home, and have all participants complete the COVID-19 Participant Code of Conduct and Risk Assessment forms. Forms may be tracked in GMS if the program would like. During practice, it is important to maintain physical distancing of at least 6 feet or 2 meters between all participants. To do this, place markers on the ground to indicate what 6 feet is and have extra volunteers to remind participants to maintain their distance. We know it is difficult, but to ensure the safety of everyone participating, there are no fist bumps, high fives, hugs, or huddles right now during this COVID-19 pandemic. You can still support your friends and teammates by cheering each other on. All participants should come to the activity with their own supplies and cannot share masks, water bottles, towels, or uniforms. In phase 2, the use of shared equipment is allowed, but should be limited. All equipment will be disinfected between each use. Wear face masks throughout activities, including arrivals and departures. Do not touch the outside of the mask. Do not scratch or touch your face. Masks do not need to be worn during active exercise. However, if sneezing, coughing, or yawning without a face mask on, participants should cover their faces with a tissue or elbow, not their hands, and throw away any tissues and wash their hands immediately. Throughout the activity, use verbal and visual signs to remind participants about hygiene, standard infection prevention, physical distancing, and use of personal protective equipment, or PPE. For more information on Special Olympics Return to Activity Protocol and Safety Guidelines, visit resources.specialolympics.org or consult your local program.
Okay. So just as a summary on this, again, we have, and again, please do read through this, read through that protocol document that's there. We'll talk in just a moment. I'm going to hand it off to Ryan about some situations in for track, and I'm thrilled in general that Kathy's with us, but I'm particularly thrilled that Kathy's with us because she actually did do track off season already, and so has some hands-on experience with that. So I know we'll be looking for some pointers from you. So, but again, the interactive webinars are already recorded, that they're up there, and you have the links. Again, you'll get the slide deck. The links are all there. And then we'll be having those live sessions I mentioned before. Coaches, we're working through national governing bodies for additional resources and such, and anything that we'll share. And then we have volunteers, a volunteer orientation that is being done for volunteers that you can actually, if you want to send your folks to it. But we know we do have some volunteers who are looking for things to do, so there may be some opportunities there. That said, we do have a really tight session here, but just want to check if anybody has one or two questions, or one or two people have question that we haven't already addressed. You can just raise your hand rather than a free-for-all. And if you don't know how to raise your hand in Zoom, you can literally raise your hand. So, anybody?
Um,
Go ahead, Pam. It sounds like Pam and I have known each other for nearly 40 years. I recognize her voice anywhere. So.
I know you've said this, and I think I've read it someplace, but I don't know. But what is the percentage of that you say that our area or our county has to be in for the COVID for us to actually participate?
You would ask that. I believe it has to be in phase one. Well, actually, I mean, anything is fine in phase one. To move from phase one to phase two, there has to be 7 consecutive days of it being below 10 within for every 100,000. Don't worry about looking that up. I mean, there's links that you can go, and Jeff has, I think, a link on the return to activities. Your area folks will be aware of it, because it also can be, we've seen this happen where they have 6 days where they're in what's called the yellow. When they're in red and when they're in orange, that's when it's phase one is the best it can be. They'll have 6 days in yellow and then they have an orange. Howard County's been dealing with that a couple times already. And then they have to reset the clock for 7 days in a row. So don't worry about the specs on that. Your area leadership will be aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? No. Ryan, you look good there with what's showing on the screen. So I will close on my mouth, and it's all yours.
Great. So at this time, feel free to unmute yourself. This is kind of the portion where we have an open discussion. In our past webinars, coaches have found this extremely helpful in kind of thinking out some of the pieces that their season may look like. So to start us off here, what are some implications of the requirements of social distancing within athletics? I know that we have a lot of events within athletics. Any piece of the sport here?
And Ryan, looks like David Tadeo, I'm sorry, had his hand raised.
Oh, David.
Steve made mention of that. So I'm not sure if we missed him.
It's okay. It's Joanna and David Taddeo. We're a team. Yeah.
Okay.
So the question is on the check-in with the questions, I'm assuming it's okay if the parents answer, because I have some verbal athletes.
It is okay if the parents answer while the athlete is there. What you should not get in the habit of, as tempting as it may be, have mom come up and, oh, no, and whatever. I'd also encourage, to the extent that you can, to try to have the athlete answer the questions if they are capable of it. They don't have to necessarily speak it. They can, nod yes or whatever, as part of their learning independence. So, okay, but obviously use what needs to be done to make it work.
That was a good point. We had some golf athletes that we had probably 4 or 5 different events throughout the season. And some of the ones that came multiple times at the beginning did not answer for themselves, or because they couldn't. But at the end, they at least understood that, no, I don't have this. So the answer to that question is no. And they did improve there and develop throughout the season.
So what about people who have been vaccinated? Any different rules for them?
No, rules are the same.
All right, we'll move on here. So back to the implications of the requirement for social distancing. Within athletics, what does that look like? What are some pieces here?
Go ahead, Vicki. Well, Mike already said the one with the shot put, trying to teach somebody how to do it the first time, or even, correcting some of their mistakes that really needed to be corrected.
Mm-hmm.
That's anything, like even with,
Right.
Yeah. You can't get 6, you gotta be 6 feet.
And that's when we will go into a little bit more later on also, like Mike mentioned. Anyone else here?
I'm curious to what a start would look like for any
Yeah.
race with the
Yeah.
social distancing.
Mhm.
If it's 6 feet apart, then I can have 2 people on the track at once.
Mhm.
And then Mike mentioned relays, unless they're wearing, I mean, we do have rubber gloves, but that is altering what they're used to.
So gloves, I believe, are not allowed in the sport to begin with, within athletics. And then also, that was something we kind of, I think, started with when we were going into COVID-19 originally. But the problem was they would put the gloves on, they would adjust their mask, or they would rub their eyes accidentally, and then it was pointless. And we we're back to step one there.
Yeah.
So we won't be taking that approach.
Yeah, the other thing with relays, I don't know about your athletes. My athletes don't have arms that would allow a handoff, even in phase 2, that would allow a handoff from 6 feet apart.
No.
Yeah, so that's that's the other reason why effectively until we get back to something close to normal. No, with the lanes that you mentioned though, one of the things, and I'm sorry Ryan if you're going to hit this later, but we have determined, even though it's not exactly 6 feet, that you can go with alternate lanes. So lane 1, 3, 5, 7 if you have an 8-lane track, that's okay. No, that's maybe 5 feet depending upon how wide the athlete is or where they position themselves on the track, but that's okay. 1 lane between is acceptable.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So another part to keep in mind here.
So Ryan,
Yes, of course, Catherine.
sorry, I was using the raise hand. I would just say that when we were doing it, we were outside.
Mhm.
And so there were a number of practice exercises that we had. Every single one of them we had to look at and adjust. So for example, we already talked about doing the every other lane, but and the field we had to break down into smaller groups to maintain the physical distancing, but also to make sure that we had appropriate oversight for that, because the number of people to manage to keep watch on the 6 feet, to watch to see if they're sneezing and if they're pulling. So smaller groups was one. And then for every single exercise, one of the things that surprised me was for the longer distance running, we had to do some adjustments there as well. So, we had some exercises where they would all start out relatively slow, and different people have different names for this, so I'll just describe it. Person in the back would then run to the front, then everybody would keep jogging, person in the back run to the front. You really couldn't do that under this exercise. So we, the only other alternative was we spread everybody out and we used a whistle. Everybody jogs slow, goes the whistle, you go fast. Whistle goes, you go back to slow. So we had to find a different way to do just about every outdoor exercise. This will be my first time trying to do it inside. And I'm thinking about all the exercises that we had inside, and this is going to be tough. I mean, there's a number of indoor exercises that we have that we're just not going to be able to do, not and maintain the 6 feet.
Mhm.
So I'd also just want to raise one other thing. You said this earlier, but I'll foot stomp. It was really hard to have the coach be doing the screening. It didn't work. You got to have somebody else doing the screening. You've got to be there for where the athletes are congregating. And oh, by the way, the discussion about wearing the mask until they actually go on and start the practice. Well, if they're inside and they're congregating, still 6 feet apart, and they have their mask on, I had a couple of times challenges where I'd say, okay, if you need to, you can take your mask off, and they would be running back to their parent, and the parent would be running out to hand the mask off. So I like the idea of maybe having some Ziploc baggies that we'll wear our gloves and hand them the box and say, you can pull out a baggie, put your mask in, and then maybe put it in a spot. But that's going to be another challenge space. Over. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I mean, the one perk about having different groups is kind of like a classroom. You break it down to smaller groups, they have more attention, and you can kind of speak to each athlete individually a little bit more. So as much as when I first heard that, I was like, oh, they have to go, it's all this effort to breaking them out. Yes, you do. But if I was the athlete, I'd be thrilled with that extra attention for improvement there. So those were some great points.
I will also note though, what we've done is instead of having an hour and a half practice, we're having 2 1-hour practices so that we can break them into smaller groups. And then within the 2 1-hour practices, we have 2 coaches. So we'll be splitting even further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Bob Signer from Baltimore City, I think it is having 3 or 4 different sessions to accommodate that there. So it's an interesting year. It takes more work on the coaches' end, but I'm really proud of everybody and the opportunities they're providing the athletes here. So another thing that came to mind was with the 400-meter races and after, they will be crossing lanes. So at this point, we are not planning on having those with them pretty much crossing each other at that point. It won't be appropriate. And then as we talked about, no relays.
I'm sorry, could you clarify? Are you saying that, I heard that there was going to be a state competition. Are you saying that in the state competition, there'll be no races greater than 200 meters?
As of now, that is the plan. Correct.
Clarify that. No races longer than 400 meters. We can
Longer
do
than
400.
400.
The
So
problem is like the 800 when you hit the brake line, even with the staggering alternate there, I've run the brake line myself numerous times. They cluster. And anything like the 1500 or whatever, where they're starting on a waterfall, they're going to cluster there as well. There's just no way to prevent it when they're all coming into the first lane. So, but yes, we will go up to 400.
So sorry, did I miss something? I thought there was no competitions this year.
Yes, you missed something. So I'm glad to be able to tell you, yeah, we are, we're still working out how we can do it. But we are absolutely looking to have some competitions. They won't look the same. And we'll talk through some stuff, but yes, we absolutely are.
I don't even know how I'm going to run my track team with these restrictions. I can't even imagine having any kind of competition. I can't even fathom it.
I can say, as Ryan mentioned, we had golf competition in the fall. We had flag football competitions in the fall. We had soccer competitions in the fall. We had cycling competitions in the fall. Again, they don't look the same, but we think it's important that we do the absolute best that we can to have those opportunities. So, and not everybody will be able to do it. So, but we'll do what we can.
all right, moving on here. So what are some implications for the requirements of no indirect or direct contact in phase 1? We talked about some of these briefly. I'm not gonna have this repeat stuff, but obviously if they're starting blocks, there's not many of our athletes that use them. But if they do, they would need to be sanitized between runners here. And just as a rule reminder, they could be used up to and including the 400-meter events. So the shot would need to be washed, mini jab, softball, tennis ball, disinfected after each athlete's use. And water bottles might be the name of the game this year. Water coolers, water fountains, anything like that would not be following the protocol here. Is there any questions on this slide?
I wouldn't say questions, but I would say the tennis ball was harder to disinfect between uses.
That's a great point.
I would add, again, I'm taking my staff hat off and putting my volunteer coach hat on. One potential solution, and talk to your area in terms of your area leadership. One way to help with that, for our program, we have built over a number of years, we have a stock of maybe 20 mini jabs, and having each athlete have, for that practice, this is their mini jab. They're going to retrieve it. They're going to throw it, obviously put in the safety protocols. That gets, I won't say gets around, but that lets many more reps per athlete in there without having to sanitize between that. Same thing goes with shots. I mean, shots are not I mean, shipping costs more than the shot itself, but they are, if you get the cast iron ones, they're relatively inexpensive. Softball's the same. So it's something to think about. Recognize that not every area is going to have the resources. The mini jabs aren't cheap. Not all of them are going to have the resources to do that, but if you can, check into it, and that could help you with that in that situation.
Mike, I don't know if you're aware, but last year you guys gave me last summer, I think they were polar bear plunge backpack things.
Mhm.
And at the beginning, I put a softball in every one of them, and they had their name on it. And they were told that it was their job to bring it to practice. It was their job to disinfect. Of course, we did a disinfecting at the beginning and the end, kind of like helping them, watching them do that. But they really liked that. They thought that was kind of cool.
If you've got that going, that's also where they could put their face mask in their Ziploc bag too. Yep.
So what we're kind of noticing with this is as we talk about it, more ideas come. It was with bocce, we were talking about how can you do bocce? Everybody's touching the balls. There were some counties that put the athlete's name on a piece of tape and taped it to the ball, or they had a certain color for each athlete in that day. So the more we brainstorm here, it may not be an option for every program. That might be the conclusion you come to. But there are some options here as we continue to think and talk through this with each other. So the last kind of question for the group here, how would you teach an athlete to get into the correct starting position? So no hands can be placed on the athlete at this time. It would be verbal mostly. What are some other ways that we could show them the correct
Demonstration.
demonstration? Yep. You could be the example for them. Maybe send some videos out throughout the week saying, I can't physically show you this hands-on wise, but here's an example. And I know that there's a lot of videos that show the lines these days, exact the angles everybody are at, and a lot of our athletes are visual learners from talking to them, so that could be helpful for them. Something else, teaching athletes arm position or the motion for shot put. How would you go about doing that?
Vicky, I think I saw your mouth moving. If you're talking, you're muted.
I was talking to myself. I was saying, get those poly spots out and put those athletes on those poly spots and just do a mass demonstration and have them all, because everybody can perfect their form.
Yep. And something I'll touch on here now that we'll get into later. We will not be encouraging athletes that are new to shot put to start this year due to how much hands-on they would most likely need for them to safely do it. You could encourage them to do the mini jab. That might be a great starter point for them. Kind of get the same form down without the risk of injuring the athlete. And the last one here, taking off for the long jump. How would you go about an athlete if I said, how do I do this? What would be your answer as a coach?
Well,
Doing in increments. Start with a hop, then a hop to an extended step, and demonstration.
yes, that sounds good, Catherine.
Kathy's fine, thanks.
Thank you.
So breaking it down. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, so here we're going to get into the athletic season a little bit more. So as a reminder, no athlete or volunteer may participate in any manner in Special Olympics Maryland program without a valid and current medical form or volunteer application or certification. At this point, also a communicable disease waiver. There's no exceptions to this policy. So some dates to keep in mind here. So May 3rd is going to be one that you want to write down. So that's going to be the training registration deadline. So at that point, all your athletes, unified partners, everyone within your program will need to be entered into GMS. If that's your first time doing it or second, third, and you need help, just let me know. I'm happy to walk you through it. It is simple once you see it. It's pretty easy to remember. So the last date for missing forms to be submitted, again, will be May 3rd. So every athlete must have a complete medical, and that will be through June 30th. So that will cover the season. That's always the protocol here. It needs to cover the season, which will be through summer games, tentatively as of now from June 4th to 6th. And every coach, partner, and volunteer must have a complete volunteer application and protected behavior certification, along with the communicable disease waiver through that date on file. So, and then for athletes or for coaches and sports volunteers, as you know, you must have that concussion certification at that time. And all coaches must have Special Olympics coach sport certification for the sport that you're in. So athletics, for this example, again, valid through June 30th.
Yeah, and Ryan, this is Steve. Just wanted to say, as somebody mentioned earlier, when are you going to have competitions and whatever? Summer Games is tentatively from the 11th through the 13th of June for Towson. But at this time, as Mike has mentioned, we're hopeful that we'll have something, but we're keeping that whole month of June open in the hopes that we can have a competition. So that's why we've extended the valid through the end of June, because if we're unable to have facilities or unable to do it, some type of competition during that tentative time frame of Summer Games, we'll extend it for another week or two or three, again, in just hopes that we're able to have some competition. So that's why that extension to the end of June for all the forms to be valid. So.
And then one other note, I'm sorry, this is Mike again, just jumping in. If your program isn't starting until after May 3rd, have your area director call me. And if we need to make an adjustment, we will work with you to do that. That said, as Ryan indicated before, absolutely no one practices without a valid medical or without the forms in hand. But we realize that some programs may not be starting until the middle of May, just getting some practices in. So give me a call. We want to try to channel them all through me, and we'll figure out what we can do best so that we can be equitable. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. I misspoke. June 11th through 13th for summer games here. So this diagram we won't run through. What you will notice, again, for everyone, communicable disease waiver must be submitted. Again, it does not matter if you had the acknowledgement risk form signed. At this point, the only thing that matters will be that CDW form. So the upcoming coaches training, each year we strive to have a coaches training. As of right now, there's not one scheduled on the books. You will hear from me in the next week or two about an upcoming opportunity. Something I wanted to ask your opinion on. It does not have to be a definitive yes or no at this point, but for bocce, after going through the previous slides and kind of expanding on what we knew, and we noticed, wow, we can do this and this and this after talking this out. We have next week an hour session scheduled to just bring the coaches together and have an open discussion. Each county kind of has a different approach and different ideas. And we're just going to use that session to bounce it off each other. I think we have 4 or 5 signed up at this point. Do you think that would be helpful to take an hour to kind of talk to other coaches from different programs, see what they're doing, some of which may have already started once this starts up. So you might be able to see firsthand what that looks like. What are your thoughts with that? Thumbs up, thumbs down, and I don't care. Kind of, okay. All right. All right, so what I might do is just send out when there's an open time, okay, some late responses, but still responses, just to see if there is interest. We might send out a link, and if we get more than 3 or 4 or something like that, we might go with it. If not, I might follow up with an email and say, didn't get enough interest, or just have you email me what kind of you're doing, and then I can send that out, something like that. We just need to help each other this year. It's the year to stick together for sure.
Ryan, sorry to be late. I think it would be helpful. Oh, I'm sorry, Pamela.
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think it might be helpful, but only if at least a couple of programs have actually started.
Started, yes,
Okay.
that's what I was gonna say, yes, exactly. That's when you run in and you're there and it's like, gosh, and you gotta change something, and well, you have to do that in teaching all the time anyway, but yes,
That's a great point. Okay.
it doesn't work.
Plus, it doesn't feel as real when you're talking about it before the season. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, here's some stuff. Once you get to your first practice, oh gosh.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So moving on here. At this point, I'm going to pass it over to Ron, who's going to cover some of the sport-specific information. And Ron, if there's any clarification you need, I know that you had this kind of on a short notice. Let me or Mike know, and we'll jump in here.
Okay, it's the first time seeing these slides. As Ryan said,
Ron,
there's
if you're not comfortable, I'm fine going through it. I don't want to put you in an awkward position.
Rob, wait 1 minute. Sorry, before you do, I passed it a tad early here. For the summer games, we talked about having a one-day event. Our SMT and some coaches met last night, and we are going to go with no spectators, most likely. It's going to keep the numbers down. We had the idea of possibly allowing one parent for when their athlete's up to come up. That's going to make another SMT member solely be that person to make sure they come back. It's just not realistic, as much as I know that parents love to see their athletes participate. So that's
the other half of that, Ryan, is chances are a lot of the folks who would be there strictly as spectators, we may ask to come in and be sport volunteers that day, either timers or helping with any event that we have out there. So it's not that, we need those things to legitimately have a competition. And that's where some of our parents can be part of the day without necessarily being just there as spectators.
Right, exactly. Again, a reduced event offering, most likely nothing over the 400 meter. Like we talked about, no new shot athletes. Again, that's for safety, just for our athletes. And we will encourage them to participate in the mini jab event. And just this year, we're in discussion as of now. We might have at two different parts of the track, the 50 meter athletes running at the same time. It would keep the day moving on. They're socially distanced. And again, with the 100 meter, we could also do that simultaneously with two different groups.
Ryan, I think some of the folks at SMD know when we run our spring games, we have around 200 athletes, and we have to run the event between, say, 10 o'clock and 1:30. So we definitely use both sides of the track. And we have a volunteer that runs the scheduling, or I do the scheduling of it, but they actually run the day of event. His name's Scott. If you wanted to, I could send you his contact information, and he could share any challenges that he might have running on two parts of the track if you haven't done that before. And I'm sorry, I don't know, maybe other counties have. So.
No, please send me his contact info.
Yeah. We have done that at Baltimore City games for, as long as I can remember. We'll do the short races on one side of the track, the longer, the 100 on the other side of the track, two sets of timers, two sets of starters, two sets of head of clerk of courses. So yeah, we do have some experience at the state level running at games like this, and it's just it allows more athletes to participate at the same time. So I mean, I really think, and it also gives we could to the extent if by June we can have limited number of spectators, even scattered throughout stands. We have two sides. If it's at Towson, we have two sets of stands sitting over there that typically we don't have anybody in the one set. So there's possibilities there depending on what goes on with the state restrictions and other restrictions going on. So the idea is to get more athletes participating in more events in one day than they could have previously.
And I understand the reason for limited attendance, no spectators, but I mean, some of our athletes require their parents to be there for, care, right? They're not independent. Not every athlete in Special Olympics is independent. And I have some that are fairly young as well. So that might be difficult. Not just for my team, but I'm sure some other teams out there may have members that if their parents not there, they're not going to be able to participate.
Yeah, I think this is Steve. I think one of the things, we're not saying there's going to be no spectators. We're going to continue to watch through that and see what the developments as they come. But the other thing that we have found, again, with the limited numbers of people and practices and everything, it's unfortunate, but in some situations, based on your numbers, it may prevent or limit the number and the athletes who are eligible or able to participate based on certain things. So, again, if you have questions like that, please let us know, and we can help work through it, or at least have discussions on those topics.
Yeah, that's a deeply sensitive thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And I can tell you that probably 70% of my team are in that boat. So it makes things very difficult for us to even just consider practices without even going to a competition.
Yeah, if you have a lot of athletes that need that one-on-one, like you said, that takes your number of participants of 10 or less, and maybe you're only having 3 athletes in a group. So that's a challenge.
How is the decision going to be made with respect to spectators? Because I'm with the speaker on this one. This may be a make or break for participation of some of our athletes. And it seems to me like there should be other options. If you know how many teams are participating, you know how large the stands are, you could have teams register only, you have a maximum number of X spectators per team based on their participants, and you allocate, it's complex, yes, but it seems like there should be an alternative that would allow us to have
Kathy, hi, this is Mike. I would put the no spectators in the category of last resort. It's really going to be facility dependent. We said Towson. We may not be able to get Towson. Towson can't book anything at this point still. It may be that we have one set of practice or a set of standards or whatever at, if we're at this high school, and then another one if we're at Washington Community College or whatever the case may be. So it'll vary, but yeah, that would be the sort of last resort with that. So yes, we're certainly sensitive. What Steve mentioned though also is a factor. If you have athletes who really need that parental right with them, that is going to affect your group size, and factor that in. The one other thing I would say, young athletes or not, I know of 2 programs who had to have one athlete each, no longer participate during this time because they couldn't handle the social distancing requirements and the no direct contact. They worked with, it wasn't the first thing they did. They worked with them and tried, and it was a non-starter. And so there may be, as Steve alluded, there may be some situations where some athletes may not be able to participate at this point in time, as difficult as that may be. So, so yeah, you may want to have those kind of conversations with your family members before they start bringing their athlete as to whether or not they can handle what's required. And that's, again, having those sessions ahead of time, virtually, for now at least, to share the information. They can make an intelligent choice at that point. So.
All right, Ron, round 2. So this might look a little familiar if you had the chance to see the email. Here are the sport-specific slides. Again, Ron is on our SMT, contributed some of the conversation we had last night regarding the season, and helps a ton down at the track.
Brian,
Yes.
I'm sorry, before you go there, 2 slides ago, you had a comment about the pentathlon.
Yep.
It says 400 is out,
Yep.
800 is in. That's
the rule. The pentathlon, the 5 events for the pentathlon for Special Olympics. So effectively, there's no pentathlon this year.
Thank you.
It's the pentathlon is now the 100, the 800 shot, long jump, and high jump.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, and then the USATF rules, I went through and looked at them. There's really nothing, they have rule changes, but it's nothing that affects us. But those are the only two changes. Or that's the only change, rather, I'm sorry, that come into play.
All right, floor is yours, Ron.
Thank you. Now, I don't know that we necessarily need to go over, the exact weight for each of these. You all have that in the slide. And in terms of rules for shot put, again, it's a little harder to teach new athletes this year. That's why it's been eliminated. I suggest in terms of shot put, if you have either a coach or you can bring in someone from the outside to demonstrate the proper way of doing shot put, or seeing a YouTube video or something, so that your athletes do it in the proper way, the safe way, and the legal way, so they're not DQ'd. So let's just move on from this one, Ryan. Mike, please feel free to jump in anywhere that I seem to stumble.
The only thing I would say is with the and I won't mention the where this happened, but Kathy, what was it, 2 seasons ago, where we were at a competition. So I think this also happened at the trainings. Person who I have a tremendous amount of respect for was using the wrong weight shots. There had the men, I think it was the men were using the 3 kilogram and the women were using a 2 kilogram or something like that. So yeah, definitely check that. What we do for Baltimore County shots, actually they're the ones we use at the state, got red fingernail polish and marked the weight on the shot itself of 4 and 3 and 2 to keep them straight. Because you can eyeball it, but you're never sure. But it has happened. You think, who would make that mistake? It's happened. Like I say, Kathy and I happened to be there together and resolved it together. So.
Okay. And actually, I'm sort of going to ask the question in terms of softball throw for Mike and Ryan. And I think we touched on this in the SMT last night in terms of we've had some exit criteria from one event to What? I'm sorry?
Last bullet under softball throw.
Okay. I don't know whether we're still going to do that this year, given the restrictions and probably the limited practice. And obviously that's going to be a decision. Maybe the decision's already been made. Or we're going to keep those same rules, Mike.
Yeah, the bottom line is that if the softball throw and the 50-meter dash, for that matter, and the tennis ball throw are designed for lower ability athletes. And so if an athlete can throw the softball 10 to 15 meters, I think the cutoff we had, Ron, was 20 meters. But if they can do that, they really should be moving into the mini jab shot. Maybe not this year, but mini jab. If anybody who can throw a softball 10 to 15 meters can learn to do the mini jab. Same thing goes, I think, for the 50-meter. I think if the cutoff we have is 10 seconds. If they can run that faster than 10 seconds, they really should be moving up to the 100. So yeah, we're looking at what's best for the athlete.
And we've had this in place for a number of years. I just wasn't sure if we were going to keep it in place in this sort of an off year.
Yeah, I don't see a reason to slide back on
that. Okay. Standing long jump obviously must be a 2-foot takeoff. Just make sure as you to the extent that you can practice a standing long jump, bring some chalk with you, so you can create a fairly wide simulated toe board, and so the athletes know exactly where to stand behind. Same thing, do the same thing for the running long jump. If you go to the next slide, Ryan, I'm sure it's on the next slide. Yep. Anyway, simulate a fairly long toe board for the jumping events, whether it's standing or running long jump. The mini jab and the softball and the ball throwing events, similar type vectors. The mini jab is 4 meters by 8 meters. Softball is 3 by 2. yeah, nothing has changed here as well. Here we go, long jump board. What for your athletes who are doing the long jump for the first time, they need to be able to jump at least 1 meter. They need to be able to get from the toe board into the sand pit, which is 1 meter away. So if your athlete is unable to jump that far, perhaps standing long jump would be a better event for that athlete. High jump, we have, I'm not even sure how many high jumpers we had last year.
We had Pence and
Yeah, the pentathlon athletes, which were
yeah,
3.
we had 2. No, we had 3 from Baltimore County, and then the 3 Pence from St. Mary's.
Okay, so there's 6 athletes last year. To the extent that you're able to practice high jump, if your athletes have done it in the past, I suspect we will offer it this year. I don't quite see a reason not to. The athletes aren't touching necessarily any pieces of equipment.
Yeah, once we're in phase two,
Right.
do it, yeah. Because
Okay.
the mat's pretty big to sanitize between jumps.
That's true.
We give that to Bill Wood to do. So
I wouldn't. Yeah. Here's your standard track colors. I don't know how standard really is. As the last line on this, many high schools and colleges, follow this. Many do not. I wouldn't worry about it so much. But in terms of, well, I was going to say the triangles for the relays, since we're not doing relays this year, those aren't too relevant for this year either, nor the break lines. This will, to the extent that we're running on any track that we're having 2 different sets of sprints, the 100-meter on one side and the 50, 25, and some of the shorter wheelchair events on the other. This will be a little bit different, but generally, if we're running a full track, here's where the starter will be for the different lengths of your event. I'm not quite sure how different areas are doing their starts with their, for their, when they're practicing their starts. We will start with gun starts, and we do this at Baltimore City Games on both sides of the track. So, your athletes may hear, gun starts for races on the other side of the track. So probably you want to be, steering your athletes towards the gun and perhaps a flag going down at the same time, so they are going off at the right time. But we will do gun starts. We don't do a whistle. We don't do ready, set, go. So to the extent in your practices or in any kind of meets, maybe in-house meets that you do run, practice with gun starts. Okay. We talked about 400 meters, 3 command start, when you mark it, set, and the gun. We're not going to be talking too much about greater than 400. Starting blocks we talked about a little earlier that will sanitize. We have, I'm trying to remember the number of athletes who actually use starting blocks. It's probably 5 or less. It was 4, whatever it is. Some of the St. Mary's athletes, Mike, I'm not sure if any of your Baltimore County athletes use starting blocks.
It became a non-starter. So
okay. Okay.
Oh no pun intended.
Yeah. So maybe if I'd have said that, the pun would have been intended. Okay. Next slide. See what that says. We talked a little bit last night. I'm not sure we've made a definitive decision yet for athletes who need escorts, visually impaired athletes. There's no possible way for us to be using guide ropes, a guide rope for your athletes. So if you have a visually impaired athlete who needs an escort, we'll talk about that. It'll have to be, well,
We have
We'll
one
talk-
in Anne Arundel County and his mother's going to be running with him.
Right, I assume that's Dan. He did that
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
The rules are, he is, guide the athlete, he or she is guided by the escort, but not led. And I know, I can't remember Jerry's last name. It lost me last night too. Gatlin. Who also races with an escort, and I think his escort runs, backwards in front of Jerry to keep him in the same lane. So those accommodations are made as long as they are uniform for the athlete and no one gets an undue unfair advantage.
And to point out this for clarity's sake, Evie running with Dan, Evie's Dan's mom, is fine because even if they're within 6 feet, because they live together. We didn't go into that here. That's a nuance here. But if they're living in the same house,
I have another
together,
walker
they
who will
can,
be with her mother.
I'm sorry.
I have a walker too that will be with her mother.
Okay, and that might be that she's 2 lanes over or something like that. That we can see what we can do. But if it's their mother, then we can do that with that accommodation if that's necessary. That should be the very, very rare case, though. Again, a visual impairment or something. Other than situations like that, they wouldn't be running with the athlete.
Okay.
Well, Mike, hold on. I'm sorry.
No. Okay.
The walker is not visually
Katie,
impaired.
Katie,
But yes.
I'll be with you guys on Sunday morning with Ryan.
Okay.
Let's talk through that details rather than we're a little over already and don't want to tie up people's time.
Okay, that's good.
Yep.
Okay. Well, rules reminders, the races that we'll no longer have been crossed out. 400-meter race, stagger start, run entirely in lanes.
There is a note on the 50-meter race. The athletes who run the 50-meter race in 10 seconds or faster should transition to a longer distance race. I think Mike talked about that.
This is, we bring this up every year, both here and at Winter Games. It's, the first place, the gold medal or the first place finisher is the first one to cross, not necessarily the recorded times. There's often an issue with, stopwatches not starting, not stopping. Anyway, we'll have folks out on the track to place the order of finish. So here you just have some suggestions on what to do if you can't find a track. And unfortunately, this season, because of COVID, tracks are a little bit less available. So give options here for you to get, especially since we're having fewer races that are going fully around the track. You just need to practice your shorter distance. You can do that with chalk on wherever you can.
That should be a very remote second choice or last choice. Yeah, running on, if at all possible, be on a track. And I would say any season other than this, always be on a track.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't know in terms of availability. I know I go out and run, and I'm running on a parking lot a lot, just up and down, from one side to the other. For a school parking lot where there's no schools in sessions on Saturday or Sunday morning. So, do what you can for this year and back to the track for all your practices for next year. Okay. Again, some more training suggestions if you don't have access to a track available.
All right, so that will conclude the webinar for now. Again, the resources section will be here and you'll receive this in email form. So you can always refer back to that. Thank you, Ron. Is there any questions before we conclude tonight? Sorry for going a little bit over. I hope you found this helpful.
I would say what I think Kathy and Pam were saying before, once you get your feet wet in terms of having a practice or two under your belt, I think a ton of questions are going to come forward. But we would you know, we'll be happy to do whatever we can to help you with that.
All right, so at this point, we will end the webinar. Thank you guys very much for being on tonight. It was a beautiful day out, so I hope you're able to get outside a little bit.
Kathy, can you stay for a second?
And Ryan, I need to ask you a question too about bocce quickly.
Yeah, feel free to stay on. We'll talk.
Okay,
All right, everybody else, have a great night.
thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, Vic.
Thanks, Vicky.
Bye.
Kathy, this will take 15 seconds.
No problem.
We found a long lost item of yours in the warehouse. I'm sure you've been missing it, an acrylic clipboard that has your name on it.
Oh,
I
wow.
thought I had brought it home, but I haven't.